That's right. We are back to our normal theme song, our normal intro, I should say, not the Justin one that I didn't even realize was all Justin images. Don't know who's responsible for that, but we'll get to the bottom of it. So yes, we are talking about all the late night shows yesterday. They all came together and they all took a stand for climate action. We're going to be talking about that and maybe a little bit more on episode 313 of the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I've got a couple of people you might recognize. One of those people, Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing just fine, and I happen to be playing the other guy on the podcast with us, Chris Talgo, in fantasy football this week, and he thinks he's going to beat me, and he's probably right.
Chris Talgo, senior editor at the Heartland Institute. Is that right? Are you going to beat Jim in fantasy football?
Well, may the best man win.
That'll be you then.
All right. All right, fantastic. Gentlemen, like I teased, 7 late night shows, I think maybe even 8. If we're going to take the word of the author of the Federalist article to heart, they all coordinated last night to do a hashtag climate night where they all, did a little climate change angle on their show. Most of you probably were unaware of this, people that are watching this, because no one seems to watch late night shows anymore. Did any of you gentlemen catch any of these shows last night?
I did not. Go ahead, Chris.
I did not, and if I were to watch late night, which is past my bedtime, I would watch Greg Gutfeld, who is actually the king of late night, and did not participate in this.
Jim Lakely, is this outside of your routine to not watch late night, or do you just never watch it?
I just never watch it. It's even farther past my bedtime than it is for Chris, since I'm an old man. But the late night shows have not been funny since, in my opinion, since David Letterman left NBC with his, Late Night with David Letterman was actually a good late night program. It was funny. It was subversive. It was counterculture. And then once he went over to CBS, his show became, it actually, I think, kind of set the template for, establishment, left-wing political screaming instead of actually trying to be funny. And Stephen Colbert, who took over for him, has made the show even worse. I say this as someone, and after just admitting, I don't watch these shows. I watch plenty of clips and I read about them because I think it's interesting, because they reflect a, I don't want to call it a sickness in our culture, but they all follow the same template as Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, where they're not actually going for laughs. David Letterman went for laughs. He put on a Velcro suit and jumped up on the opposite Velcro wall. He would throw watermelons off of a roof and make that funny. Now they all go for what they call clapter, or instead of laughter, it's just clapter. They just fill their audience with other left wingers and just say left wing things that are supposedly funny, and then they just get applause and move on to the next one. So to have a completely unfunny night dedicated to climate change, it's just as funny as the other nights they have, which isn't funny at all.
Was that a slight against Jon Stewart?
Yes, he has a new show coming out too, on Apple TV. So he's kind of reviving his career again, doing a show like that. I read a piece. I think it might have been a Breitbart, or maybe it was at our friend Christian Toto, Hollywood and Toto, and they pointed out that Jon Stewart left late night in 2015. The country has changed a lot. The culture and Hollywood has changed a lot since 2015. We've had the Me Too movement. We've had, everyone going woke. We've had, all these different changes. I might actually tune in just to see how Jon Stewart is going to try to be funny in today's environment, because
I actually like Jon Stewart back in the Daily Show. I mean, maybe towards the end of it was getting a little, played out, but I actually liked him. And you said David Letterman was the last time late night was funny. I was actually a big fan of Conan O'Brien. So I don't know if that's like a kosher thing to say to a conservative audience or anything like that, but I thought he was great. In fact, I still think he's hilarious.
I thought the Arsenio Hall show was the peak of late night. Maybe the Chevy Chase show, but definitely Arsenio Hall.
Chevy Chase for sure.
Chevy Chase, yeah.
It was short-lived, but man, it was great.
No, but during some of the later years, especially in the Trump era, Conan started to go a little bit kind of off the rails for me. And like, even despite all of the biases and all of that, like, I would still regularly watch Saturday Night Live until the Trump era. And I swear there was one episode we were watching it, and we were just aware that every time they would do the weekend update, it would just be a nonstop like Trump stuff, stabs at Trump and all of this. And I remember we were watching it, and I was right before I was about to start, I was like, all right, over under, how many Trump related things they're going to talk about in the weekend update? I'm going to put it at 6. And then there was 12. And that was the last episode we watched. We're just like, all right, we're done. Comedy is second, clearly, to the political agenda. So we are done. Basically haven't watched SNL since.
Just Donnie, since you bring up Saturday Night Live, with Norm Macdonald passing last week, which was obviously super sad. But I was reminded how funny Saturday Night Live was in the especially in the mid 90s, when I was like, a big fan of it, and how unfunny, just how far it's fallen.
Oh yeah, no, and the same thing goes for all these late night shows. Like I did the same thing where I was watching a bunch of clips of Norm on YouTube. Norm Macdonald goes on this show. Norm Macdonald goes on that show. Him on Conan is fantastic. Him on David Letterman. Like, the shows were funny.
You're right.
They were funny. And then for the prep for this show, I have to turn on all of these shows that are going on now, and it's the opposite of funny.
They're depressing.
Like, not only does comedy come second, no, it doesn't come second. It comes like third or fourth. Like, that's like, is it funny? I don't know. We'll just move on. We'll crack a joke next episode.
Well, I mean, Chris Talgo mentioned it earlier, and Greg Gutfeld. Greg Gutfeld, he actually came up in publishing. He was an editor of some of those, what they call lad mags, like HMF or whatever it was called, and I think he was an editor at GQ as well. But he didn't come up in comedy, though he's a very funny person, and he's been great on The Five. He's one of the reasons The Five is watched by millions of people in the middle of the afternoon or late afternoon Eastern time. It gets better ratings than anything on prime time, when people would be home and watching something on CNN or MSNBC, or I'm sure it gets better ratings than Matlock too on Hallmark Channel. But, they decided, we're going to make a daily show on cable that you have to pay for to compete against the big boys on the networks, Colbert and Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel. And he's crushing them in the ratings. I mean, crushing is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but he is beating them. And they're on broadcast, broadcast TV, and he's on cable. And his show I've seen a few episodes. It's a little spotty, but it's an alternative to these people who are not actually interested in entertaining a mass audience. And so he's filling an audience that really wants to see something. And I think that's one of the biggest TV miracles of the last 5 years, is that Greg Gutfeld, you could put a late night. People have always been clamoring. Conservatives are like, how come conservatives aren't funny? Right? How come conservatives can't have a funny show? Well, they can. Greg Gutfeld has one right now on Fox News of all places.
Yeah, the unique. Just to your point about the Greg Gutfeld, Steven Crowder, he considers his show to be like a late night show alternative. Although I think they've actually shifted to be like a morning show type of thing. But that's on the Blaze, and he's funny. So we've got some stuff going on. It's just that we have to take alternative avenues, because all of the networks are clogged up with this garbage that we're going to talk about today.
Well, that's one of that's what's great about the age we live in, which is streaming, and we're never going back to broadcast or even standard cable these days. You can find funny on YouTube for as long as they don't censor you for it, but you can find your own audience. Steven Crowder has an enormous audience on YouTube. And people had found him mostly organically or through word of mouth. I've never seen very many ads for when I watch a lot of YouTube. I don't see ads for Steven Crowder's show. I learned about that from other conservatives who thought his show was hilarious.
Yeah,
I know that you're a big fan. Yeah, you told me about it. You're part of the Mug Club with Steven Crowder.
That's right.
And so it doesn't really matter. I think these late night shows, they used to be cultural touchstones. They used to be, sometimes they would be water cooler discussions the next day at work.
Absolutely.
Especially I think during the classic David Letterman years.
They used to launch
in the 80s.
Comedians' careers. Them going on there and having a good set and having a good back and forth with, David Letterman or something. That would launch careers.
Yeah. Johnny Carson purposely, he was probably on the left. If you were to guess, he was probably on the left because he was in Hollywood for his entire adult life. but you never really got a sense of what his politics were because his monologues took shots at both sides. He didn't get into politics when he was interviewing people, unless he actually brought on a political person to talk about something. But even then, it wouldn't be overtly rooting for one side or the other. But now you know that all these guys are hard left. Jimmy Kimmel is ridiculous. He doesn't. He's not funny. He used his monologue to advocate for universal health care.
Oh, right.
And then now he's using his monologue to advocate for people who don't have the vaccine to be denied health care.
Oh.
So I guess it's not really universal health care anymore. And so the era of late night being some kind of like I said, a cultural touchstone, something that the entire country could enjoy and talk about, as a community, as an American community together, is over. And so we're going to find alternatives, be it Steven Crowder, Greg Gutfeld, or there'll be somebody even funnier coming up on YouTube down the line, I'm sure.
Yeah, another thing is, like, it seemed like maybe in the past, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, maybe I'm overstating things or putting on rose-colored glasses, but it seemed like the late night show hosts during that era had like unique voices. Like you could expect kind of different. You would have your favorite, right? And now, and I've got some video evidence to prove this, everyone's got the same voice. Everyone's essentially reading off the same script. So here's some video evidence of that. This is seemingly every time there's something in the news, it's like, all right, get all of our late night shows up. We got to give them our jokes to whether it's hydroxychloroquine or something like that. They all need to say something bad about it. So this is them all talking about that ivermectin or whatever it's called.
Ivermectin, yeah.
Ivermectin. So yeah, let's see all their unique voices talk about this.
I hope you guys had a good Labor Day weekend. You did? Yeah. Yeah, Americans got together to fire up the grill, grab a cold beer, and toss back some horse dewormer.
Oh,
don't
everyone
worry about
laughed.
the anti-vaxxers being unprotected because they have found a new drug that also does not protect them. It's called ivermectin, which is a horse dewormer. So you'll probably still get
Can we talk about his mustache, by the way?
COVID.
No,
On
let's
the
skip
bright
that.
side, you could win the Preakness. Opponents say the science behind ivermectin is clear. In fact, we've been sent a demonstration of just how it defends your bloodstream from the virus.
Yeah, that's a video of a horse kicking viruses.
Yeah, sorry for the audio only listeners.
People are still taking this ivermectin. This poison, the poison control centers have seen this spike in calls
That's a
from
lie.
people taking this livestock medicine to fight the
Fake news.
coronavirus, but they won't take the vaccine, which is crazy. It's like if you're a vegan and you're just like, no, I don't want a hamburger. Give me that can of Alpo instead.
I gotta say,
So yeah, we could just keep going through this. I mean, it's just like I said, everyone's got their own version of this. At least in this case, like the jokes are somewhat different. In other cases, they who's making all that noise, by the way? Is that me? That's
ahead.
you, Andy. I hear you. In some cases,
here's what
the
people
jokes
are
are
talking about. You guys, President Trump
identical to each other. Here, let's watch some of this.
gave his big speech at the UN General Assembly today, and at one point he threatened to totally destroy North Korea. Yeah, he said he has a good plan to do it too. He's going to run for president of North Korea. So that's what he's already got the hack made.
During the speech, Trump threatened to, quote, totally destroy North Korea. Which I know, well, I think can only mean one thing. Guys, it means he's going to run for president of North Korea.
Wow.
That's so unique, man.
Trump
so
also
unique.
said during his address that if North Korea continues working on its nuclear program, the U.S. will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Oh, my God. Trump is going to run for president of North Korea.
Like, do they literally get the same script?
How do three different shows write the same jokes? I think that's proof of groupthink in Hollywood than anything else you could actually imagine.
Well, that's actually what I think it is. I think that it's just this little echo chamber that all of these Hollywood writers and New York writers are all in, and they all have the same brain, so they all come up with the same joke. It's just embarrassing. It's absolutely embarrassing. So all of these writers and all these people with the same brain decided to come together to talk about climate action. So like I said, yesterday was their big climate night, late night show, which featured super entertaining guests like Greta Thunberg and John Kerry. So you just know the night was just full of hilarity. The Federalist, the one article that I referenced earlier, climate night was just as condescendingly cringy as expected. He sums it up really well, and there's a lot of jokes in here. Thankfully, he watched a lot of this, so I don't have to. But he said that there was 8 late night comedy shows that teamed up on Wednesday. I thought there was only 7, but he says there was 8 to dedicate their entire portions of their programs to climate change, with each regurgitating the catastrophic claims aired by newsrooms on their own networks. By now, the legacy late-night programming that used to feature genuine comedy has morphed into tribalistic political broadcasting with snarky comedians playing into the confirmation bias of their left-wing audiences. The Trump years accelerated that process, if not completed it, and this week was no exception to their new routine. That is actually something that I think we've talked about on this show, that like the Trump has seriously accelerated it, whether you want to call it Trump derangement syndrome or whatever, but like he is, it's like people have fatal cases of it now. And yeah, this is no different. So how do these shows play out? Samantha Bee dedicated the first segment of her show to the cause, wherein she bizarrely began the night with a skit on a bike outside the studio, joking her muscles were the strongest source of renewable energy on the planet. Sorry, I had to wait for everyone that's listening to finish laughing before I continue.
That's so funny.
Quote, the energy this fight was running our entire show because climate change has arrived faster than many of us thought, but not as fast as me shredding on this bike.
Ha 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 ha.
Pausing for laughter. Thank you.
We need a Rimshot soundtrack. We got to get that for next time.
So bad. Colbert said, quote, Americans treat climate science like it's soccer. We know it's out there. It really matters to the rest of the world, but no one can make us care because no one in America likes soccer, guys. Get it? These are good jokes.
You know, these jokes would be funny if Norm Macdonald said them, because nobody bombed better than Norm Macdonald. So
yeah,
that's your standard. Keep going.
That would
Donnie.
be intentional. That would be intentional. Seth Meyers, talking about the forest fires in California, said, quote, Billy Joel is going to have to write an update for 2021 and call it, actually, we did start the fire. Myers said, going on to sing a climate change themed parody of Joel's 1989 hit.
You know, nothing's more relevant in a current events joke than referencing and rewriting a song from over 30 years ago. That's cutting edge stuff, man.
At one point, the self-proclaimed entertainer just demanded that Congress pass the behemoth $3.5 trillion infrastructure package because it contains provisions to deal with climate change. That must have been a real side splitter there.
That must have brought down the House.
The late night comedian's guest was White House climate envoy John Kerry. And John Kerry is like neck and neck with Al Gore in the competition to be like the least funny and least charismatic person in the universe. So again, I bet that was just full of laughter. Oh my God, isn't this so much fun, everybody? You guys want to keep going? Because I've got more jokes here.
You alleged jokes.
So one thing I'll say, and the title of this is that the late night comedy night, whatever, or no, sorry, there was no comedy. Climate night was a disaster.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And one of my metrics for that, other than it just being a complete comedic disaster, was the fact that I did not see it trending on Twitter at all yesterday. I didn't watch these shows live. I caught some clips this morning and all of that. But I was checking on Twitter to see, and I didn't see it trending, despite the fact that 8 shows all last night were all talking about this. I didn't see it trending. So, Jim, do you think that, like, ratings-wise, it was a disaster or just comedic?
I think it was a disaster. It was definitely not comedic.
Plain and simple.
Well, no, I mean, look, when a comedy show or I mean, these are comedy shows. They're nominated for, believe it or not, for things like, best writing on a variety show, comedy, in the Emmys every year. So their job is to make people laugh and to entertain them. And when you're advocating just, you know what, the Congress needs to pass that $3.5 trillion bill so we can save the planet. I mean, they're not even trying to be funny anymore. They're trying to be propagandists. These networks, these major legacy networks, up and down from the news division to the entertainment division, are propaganda arms for the ruling Democratic Party in this country.
Yeah, you know,
and it's getting so overt that they act, that you see something like Climate Night. Any comedy writer worth being paid at all would have protested and said, no, my job is to be funny. My job is not to make climate jokes and that's not easy to do. Actually, it is easy to do if you make fun of climate alarmists. There's a lot of comedy to be mined there, but you should on principle say, no, my job is to be topical and funny. I am not going to dedicate my show or my monologue to advancing the leftist climate agenda or anybody's climate agenda. I have a responsibility to my audience and to myself as a professional comedy writer to be funny and not be trying to pull anybody's agenda, especially on a coordinated way across all the late night shows, to all do it at the same time. It's like I said, any writer who has any integrity would have rejected that out of hand just on principle. But instead, what we got was a bunch of unfunny propaganda. And it's just like the news division, and it's in the entertainment division. I've been rewatching. I go back and forth between kind of binging episodes of 30 Rock and binging episodes of The Office. I think two of the greatest comedies of the last 20 years. And I'm in 30 Rock binge moment right now. And 30 Rock, at least every year, NBC would have Green Week, and the little peacock in the corner of the screen would go from the colors of the peacock to just being all green. And so 30 Rock, to its credit, the first few years kind of made fun of the whole concept, and it was actually pretty funny. They had David Schwimmer come on as a character called Greenzo, who was very self-righteous and got a big head and thought he was actually saving the world because he's dressed up in a costume and talked to kids. And they were poking fun of the idea that environmentalists, by talking and hectoring everybody, were actually doing anything to save the world.
Well, that character had nothing on Roy Cyclops, Dwight's character from The Office.
That's right. So yeah, The Office did these things too. It can be funny, but as the years wore on, 30 Rock became a little bit more serious about it. They also had Al Gore on there twice in two very unfunny bits. So the entirety, the left control. There's evidence all around us that the left controls every single cultural and political institution in this country. It always have, and they are using it to move agendas, not to actually, as an entertainment show should do, entertain you.
To that point, because I've had a conversation with somebody talking about like the liberal media, right? And it's just like, scoffing at that. Like, okay, well, they got, liberals have CNN and MSNBC, but like Fox News is bigger than them. Their shows have better ratings than anything on CNN and MSNBC. It's like, no, that's like totally beside the point. Yeah, they have those, but they also have all of these channels and all of these shows, and basically everything that you watch TV and movie wise has like liberal agenda stuff in it. It goes way beyond CNN and MSNBC. Like, if this isn't proof of it, I don't know what is. Right. They own the media. People don't generally get their news. Your average person doesn't generally get their news from sitting down and watching CNN and MSNBC. No. Most people younger than me probably get their news from The Daily Show. And, other people that are just like flipping through channels at night, they get most of their news from these shows. So that actually kind of brings me to my next kind of question to the panel here. I'll ask you, Chris. Do you think that this moved the needle on climate change? All of these shows getting together and talking about how they're going to do all this climate change stuff on the same night. Is it preaching to the choir? Do you think it moved the needle? What do you think?
I doubt it's going to move the needle. Just do want to say one quick thing, going back to what you guys were talking about earlier. And I remember a time when late night comedy was about escaping, like the real world per se. And especially, since these late night TV shows are on after the local news, it was a nice way to get away from all that and to just, go and laugh for an hour and
lampoon it.
Right, exactly. And they were apolitical, but it's very different now. It's almost like an extension of the local news for another hour.
Well, so ABC, I was actually going to have you guys, I was going to quiz you guys if you can guess where like Samantha Bee's show was on.
TBS.
Oh, nice. Okay, well, I bet you'll pass that quiz, so I'm just going to skip that. But, it's like TBS, ABC, NBC. They're not, they don't have comedy in the name of their channel, right? So Comedy Central with The Daily Show, Trevor Noah, that might be funnier than all these terrible jokes that I was reading. So their guest of the night was Greta Thunberg. So just watch and how amazingly funny this was. Get ready to laugh, everyone.
Welcome back to The Daily Show.
Thank you so much.
Last time I spoke to you, you had just ridden like a catamaran across the ocean. What do you prefer? Commuting on a catamaran across the ocean or just doing a Zoom?
I mean, it's nice to go on a catamaran, but it's also much more practical to do it over Zoom, to be honest. Of course, I've had my bad
Should I pause for laughter? Or?
moments with Zoom and online classes, and it gets a bit tiring sometimes, sitting every day on Zoom, just watching your own face. It's not pleasant.
You see, great.
I mean, come on,
Yeah.
people, come on. This is comedy gold. Everyone.
No, that last line by Greta was funny. Give her that.
It's just not for the same reasons. It's not for the reasons that they intended that it would be funny. So I actually watched. I suffered through that entire thing, and it was exactly how you would expect it to go. At one point, she says that talking about climate change is not something that makes you popular. She says, quote, people don't like you if you talk about climate crisis. She says while being on the Daily Show on Comedy Central in prime time. I'm pretty sure she was on Time Magazine, the front cover of that too.
Yep.
She was named Times Person of the Year.
Yeah.
Of
Man,
course,
it's-
you don't get popular talking about climate change, though. I mean, come on.
No. Well, actually,
She's a straight up martyr for it.
yeah. Well, you don't get popular talking about the climate change the way we talk about it. You get plenty popular talking about climate change the way she talks about it, the way the media talks about it, and that is that human activity is causing a catastrophe, that the earth is in literal peril, that cities will be flooded. I mean, all this stuff they've been telling us for my entire life. Again, I'm the oldest guy on this podcast. I'm 51. I've been told since I was young that human activity is destroying the earth, and we only have a few more years before we have to turn everything around in the next few years, or it's going to be too late and disasters will come. Our entire lives, it's always 10 years away. And the idea from Greta that her climate activism, which has made her and her family frankly wealthy, which has made her one of the most famous people on earth. Oh, poor me. Oh, nobody loves me. Are you crazy?
Well, you know what's funny is I actually started feeling sorry for her at one point during this interview. So at one point, Trevor asked Greta if she's ever gotten tired of talking about this climate stuff, and without hesitation, you can go and watch this. I'll include it in the show notes. Without hesitation, she says yes, that she does get tired of this. Later on, they're talking about TikTok and whether or not she's ever been on TikTok, and she says no, and he says that if you were on TikTok, if you did get into that, whatever, it would completely consume you, and you'd probably never talk about climate change again. And then he starts to move on, but she fits in. That would actually be really nice. She says, it's just are you being forced to do this against your will? This sounds kind of awful. And then there was actually one thing that did make me laugh. Again, this is unintentional. This is her talking about this is also responding to the idea of don't you get sick of people constantly coming up to you and talking about climate change? So here, watch this. This is actually, I think it's a response to Samantha Bee's earlier joke about riding her bike to work or something. So here we go.
Of talking about the climate by now, and people always try to tell me
whether you're built.
Oh, you add stuff. You are so terrible. It was just, it's just get ready for the unintentional hilarity here.
that I should be impressed by them. I took the bike to work today, and they look at me and okay, I don't care. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
I would actually love to supercut the Samantha Bee riding to a bike to work thing with Greta being I don't care. That's nonsense.
Well,
so yeah.
Well,
Go ahead,
Donnie, just real quick, just taking a really macro view from here, I wonder, what is the driving motivation of this kind of sudden shift? And I think it has to do with the the media has unfortunately in the last couple decades a few companies control so much of the media, whether it's Comcast, Viacom, or a few others. So first of all, they're all preaching, from the same song sheet to the same choir. But second of all, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that in Hollywood, if they were to go off the reservation, they would be shunned. They would not get invited to the cool parties. They would not, get their Emmy nominations. So I think a lot of this is just groupthink. I think a lot of this is they're doing it because it's it's the in thing to do right now. I bet you anything that those comedians like Jimmy Kimmel, who, let's remember, used to host a show called The Man Show. Okay, let's remember that. That was about 10 years ago. He also was Karl Malone in blackface on that TV show. So I truly believe that they do not have these deeply held ideological beliefs. I think they're just doing it because, why? Because their producers and their the people that sign their paychecks just tell them to do that. So they're just pawns.
Oh, no. Well, a couple of points to that. It's like if 5 of these 7 or 8 talk shows said that they were going to do this, like the other one's going to be like, no, I'm not going to do it. I actually want to do like comedy. Like, no, they have to do it. Everyone else is doing it. They have to do it.
It's so broad across the entire like media spectrum, whether it's ESPN or whether it's like just every show that I can think of, that now has that social justice side to it.
Right. Yeah, no, it's definitely virtue signaling as well, right? So at the end of the day, now they could be like, yeah, we did something for the climate. We dedicated a show on Wednesday in mid to late September on climate change that one time, and it was, we had to sacrifice humor for it. So it's just totally virtue signaling. So
well, they call it greenwashing, Donnie, and it's the idea that saying a joke about bicycling to work, and so I guess that's somehow subversive. That comedy is somehow subversively going to encourage people to take bikes to work instead of driving, But how did Samantha Bee actually get to work that day?
Probably a limo.
Probably a limo. A lot of these guys have car services that pick them up and take them to. And so, how did John Kerry get out to, what show was he on? Whichever show he's on. How did he fly out there? He flew out there on a private jet.
But Jim, the limo that took Samantha Bee to her studio had "Tax the Rich" spray painted across the side of it, so it's good.
No, it was a Flintstones limousine, and she used her feet to actually pedal it.
I'm pretty sure that's true.
Yeah,
right.
But look, see, if you want to, do you know who the only subversive, truly rebellious and subversive comic in all of Hollywood is? It's Ricky Gervais, and he has been basically blackballed from. He's basically been, somebody's phone is ringing. He's basically been blackballed from Hollywood. He was the best host of the Golden Globes in decades. And he skewered Hollywood for its hypocrisy. He skewered them for their, especially their climate hypocrisy and all of that. And so his reward for that, he's canceled. Nobody wants to work with him in Hollywood anymore. But again, he has his own thing going on. He has his own production company. He produces his own shows and puts them on streaming services like Amazon and Netflix. So, that's the future of, if you really want to see good comedy, if you really want to be rebellious, you have to go find it yourself. It's out there, but you're not going to find it on these networks because there's a reason why. You know what? I think this is one of the important points. It was not Jimmy Kimmel or Seth Meyers or even Samantha Bee's idea to call up their fellow hosts and say, you know what we need to do? We need to do a climate night together. No. This came from the top. These are the suits. Right. These are the suits that post this on their own entertainment shows. And again, if these comedy writers, if these creators, if these actors had any integrity in their craft, they would have rebelled against it. They would have rejected these ideas, or they at least, could have maybe made the best of it and tried to actually be funny.
Yeah.
But really the only comedy to be mined is making fun of the panic of the climate alarmists. And that is completely verboten. Ricky Gervais will do it, but these guys, these fakes, these frauds, these comic frauds won't.
Yeah, I know that like they're talented writers and stuff, but I don't think they're talented enough to make Greta Thunberg or John Kerry come off as funny. So no matter how much effort you put towards it, I don't think I think it was a doomed effort from the beginning. So I want to dedicate the rest of this episode to just talking about the climate change related stuff that these late night hosts won't talk about, right? The
Mhm.
other side of the spectrum. So we're going to get into all of this. So, is there a climate crisis? Is the world really going to end in 10 years? Obviously, they didn't touch any of this stuff. And for the sake of time on this podcast, I think we're going to largely skip over it too. Although, if you are interested in that facet of this conversation, we do have a conference coming up in a few weeks. Jim, you can tell our fine people about that.
That is the 14th International Conference on Climate Change. It's held in Las Vegas at the Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, October 15th through 17th. We are going to have more than 50 speakers that are going to be, talking from frankly, a climate realist perspective. These are scientists. These are some of the leading scientists in the world whose research has shown that human activity is having an effect on the climate, but it is slight and it is not catastrophic. And the flip side of that, which we're going to talk about here in a minute here on the podcast, is that the proposed solutions to solve the so-called climate crisis, to quote unquote stop climate change, which is what these comedy writers thought was possible, it is not possible. And that the solutions to do this that they are putting out there are economically ruinous. It will spread poverty around the world. It will steal your freedom. It will ruin economies. There is not a single positive aspect to the solutions that the United Nations and our ruling culture have for quote unquote stopping climate change, which is impossible. And so it's really important for you to know this stuff, so that, one, you can filter out this propaganda, but also communicate to your friends and family what the truth is about the climate. And you could do this by going to Las Vegas and joining us at this conference. You can go to heartland.org. There's a link there on the page with a graphic image where you can go and get tickets and more information. Or if you cannot make it with us in Las Vegas and don't want to travel, if you're in Canada, maybe you can't get out of your prison country, you can watch it. You can watch it on heartland.org as well. So just stay tuned. Keep going to heartland.org. You'll learn more about this program as we're putting it together.
Yep, no, absolutely. And that'll be coming up, in just a couple of weeks. When is that? Say it again.
October 15 through 17 in Las Vegas at Caesars Palace.
Yeah, so there's going to be plenty of information. I don't want to retread any of that stuff. I think that is an important conversation to have. It definitely will supply you with the intellectual ammunition to respond to some of the things that, these late night shows were talking about, whether it's like the forest fires in California. Oh, is that climate change? Are you sure it's not just like poor forest management and buildup of like combustible, like dead trees and all of that stuff? Like, no, it's definitely climate change. All of these, it'll give you all the information to be able to push back against that. But realistically, obviously there's like the policy side to all of this too, but realistically, when you're talking to like friends and family about climate change and they're super concerned, they're super nervous, they're like the alarmist type, I think that type of information is valuable if you're trying to basically get them off the ledge, right? Like, don't jump, like everything's going to be fine. I think that that information is good for that cause. But I think like at best, you're just going to get them to a point where they're like, all right, but we should do something just in case, right? Maybe I'm not going to jump off the ledge or not have babies like AOC, talked about before, or, not think about the future because climate change is imminent or whatever, but maybe we should still do something. And that part of the conversation is the part that I find most interesting, because the proposed solutions that they have out there are just terrible. And like, it's not even a opinion. It's like facts. And I've got a billion links in the show notes for this. I'll put it all in there afterwards that show that their solutions are absolutely terrible. And I didn't watch, admittedly, I didn't really watch a whole lot of the late night shows. I just saw some clips in preparation for this, but in the clips, I did not really see them talk about the proposed solutions. I didn't really see them hawking wind and solar too much. They were just basically trying to say like the world's doomed. We got to do something. So besides Samantha Bee's embarrassing joke about riding her bike, but that if they were to talk about it, surely wind and solar would be the thing that they talk about as the saving grace, the thing that we need to prevent us from absolute disaster that's incoming. And of course, these shows won't tell you that wind and solar absolutely suck at generating reliable and affordable energy. That is like the most basic point. If you're going to leave this podcast knowing something, it should be that single point. So I've got in the show notes, I've linked episode 205, where we spent the entire episode talking about the shortcomings of wind and solar. But I do want to get into some of the highlights. Chris, do you think that tactically that is a good idea to kind of skip over the "Are we in a climate crisis?" or am I doing a disservice by doing that?
Well, I'm going to answer that slightly differently. I'm going to just speculate as to why they would do that. And I think that they are using the fear mongering that they used so successfully during the COVID-19 pandemic. So they don't really talk about solutions like, hey, natural immunity or something like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine to try to actually solve the problem, because they just want to keep beating the problem into the ground so that the population just accepts their like doomsday apocalyptic predictions. So that's why I think they just keep harping on this.
Yeah, you know what? As you were saying that, I was thinking about the Seth Meyers that was like, we need to pass this infrastructure bill, this $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill. So it's like, maybe it's because the solutions aren't as idealistic.
Yeah, the solutions don't apply to the actual problem that they're describing.
Right, but they change, at any given time.
Right.
If they did this show 3 months ago, before this $3.5 trillion albatross package was being talked about, he would probably be hawking some other legislation,
That's why I think they learned a lot.
Purely political.
They learned a lot from the pandemic. The notion that the CDC can say that you don't have to pay rent anymore. That has nothing to do with the pandemic. However, they've increased their power, and this 3.5 trillion, actually 7 trillion budget reconciliation bill is not really about climate change or anything that they claim it's about. It's about more power. They're about more power.
It's funny that you brought up the COVID thing, because I did have a note in here about with the section with Greta, and he was the Trevor Noah was asking like, what should we do? And she referenced the pandemic and said, like, to deal with a pandemic, we were able to just come up with seemingly magically all of this money to help deal with the pandemic. And like, why can't we do the same thing about climate change? And I'm just like, beautiful. That's exactly what I've been saying they're going to do. They're going to use the pandemic response as a roadmap for climate change in the future.
Just this morning, as I was watching, the news today, CNN made a point that, during the pandemic, air pollution would decrease so much.
Yeah.
And you were able to see mountains for the first time in some places. And yes, it was terrible that we had to shut down the economy, but actually it was great because our air quality increased.
So those are the words of the ultra elite. These are people that did not have their lives disrupted by COVID very much at all.
Yeah,
these are people whose jobs do not depend on actually going somewhere.
You can see the mountains in my backyard.
Yeah, as I do my writing job for The Guardian from my back patio in Pasadena, California, or something like that. The elites have actually never been that inconvenienced by COVID. I know we're not supposed. This wasn't a COVID podcast today, but the evidence is all around you, and it has the parallel to climate change and the supposed steps we have to take to fight climate change, right? John Kerry flew to his appearance on a late night show on a private jet. Greta is on probably a $10 million catamaran to go across the ocean in a stunt for a climate conference. And in COVID, all these people, their lives are not disrupted. And so, in both things, if you're going to make that parallel that we can solve the climate crisis, if we just do everything we did in locking down and ruining people's lives for COVID, we can solve the climate crisis.
Right.
Except though they will not be the people that will be inconvenienced. We see it now with the COVID, where the mayor of, the examples are legion. The mayor of San Francisco doesn't have a mask on when she goes out to a nightclub because the band Tony was reunited. She felt the spirit, and putting a mask on wasn't really in spirit with feeling the spirit.
She wasn't thinking about it, Jim.
Right. She was feeling the spirit of the moment, and she didn't have her mask on. And then the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, going out to a restaurant when everyone else is told not to go out to restaurants, and not wearing a mic.
He was feeling the spirit, Jim.
Yeah. He was smelling the spirit, I guess. Everybody else was. But look,
No,
it's
well-
when they come up with these climate solutions, everybody realize you will have to comply to these rules.
Yeah.
They will not. You're the one who should not be taking more than 2 flights a year. They
Oh.
will fly wherever the hell they want
That-
at the time they want on the private jet they want.
That
But your
reminds
life
me.
is going to be inconvenienced, not theirs. You give up your car. You get into a glorified golf cart that is not going to get you from Chicago to Denver or Pittsburgh in a reasonable amount of time. You do that. You get in that electric car. They will continue to have their gas powered limos. Their lives will never ever be inconvenienced by the strictures they're going to put on your life in order to save the planet. It will never happen. And realize that, because the COVID is the exact same thing, and you see it every single day. Their lives are not changed at all, but yours must be.
Yeah, there was an article shared by The Nation. Pre-pandemic travel habits were destroying the earth. They must never be allowed to return. And I just thought about that. Like, so they're talking about you and me going on a plane. They're not talking about John Kerry going to COP27 or whatever it is in his private jet, right? That type of travel habit will stay the same, surely, no problem.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's completely to your point, Jim. But keep that in mind, because I do want to get to that idea a little bit later. But I'm just going to blaze through some of these. I'm putting all of these links in the show notes. I'm not going to get into them just for sake of time and all of that. And we've talked about it. If you want to see a lengthier discussion of it, watch episode 205. But the cost compared to reliable energy for renewables, it's much more expensive. Anyone that tries to claim otherwise, they're not taking into account government subsidies. The idea that wind and solar is going to get more efficient as innovation continues, they're going to get more efficient. There's a study by the Manhattan Institute that said that the days of a 10-fold increases in efficiency are over. And when you read through that, it actually talks about how wind and solar are getting to like a point where their theoretical limit of how much energy they can produce from wind and solar. The land area and resources needed for wind and solar are absolutely massive. We talked about this before. If we wanted to change everything to wind and solar, we would need to use like the land space of like 2 Californias or something like that to generate the electricity needed. And that's not including if we wanted to electrify the vehicle fleet too. The environmentally toxic, the waste material that comes from wind and solar. Again, this is something we talk about all the time. This is just like the best. This is like our greatest hits album right now that we're doing. We could pull up a picture of like all the wind turbines that are like the size of whales that are just being buried in fields in Iowa because they're not recyclable in any way. And the lifespans of these things are like 15 to 20 years. I think I'm actually being generous with that. Solar panels, they use cadmium and lead when they're building these things, and some like toxic stuff that you can't just throw into a landfill when they're not useful anymore because they can break and seep into the groundwater and all of that stuff. So they basically have to be treated like radioactive waste. And California is learning that the hard way because they've gotten the most renewable energy usage going on in there. Requires a ton of rare earth materials. This I think we'll get into a little bit more when we talk about China in a little bit. And my favorite piece of evidence of all time when talking about how terrible wind and solar is that Michael Moore realizes and acknowledges how terrible it is. Planet of the Humans documentary. He talked about how wind and solar, if we transition to everything to wind and solar, it wouldn't do anything to stop climate change. So if you want to, hear it from like the left's mouth, watch that documentary. It's great. And I don't think conservatives use that enough. Michael Moore acknowledges that wind and solar is absolutely terrible. I can get into a whole bunch of other stuff. The cost of energy for people is, what's the word where it hurts the poor? It's regressive, right? It hurts the people that need the help most. And that curbing CO2 in the U.S. is going to do nothing to reverse global trends because China's output dwarfs the United States. Like all of these things, I feel like a broken record talking about all of this. And of course, none of it is talked about by any of these late night show people, any of these climate alarmist activist type. Greta Thunberg's not going to respond to any of these ideas because they only look at one side of the ledger. And that's another point that I like to bring up all of the time. They look up one side of the ledger. and disregard all of the other unintended consequences and things that are necessary to make that other side of the ledger work. Gentlemen, anything that you want me to elaborate on any of those points that I kind of rapid fired through, or any other points that you want to add on to that list?
I think after going through that laundry list of problems, it shows that they are fundamentally unserious about this.
Right.
You know, they get up and they say the catchphrases, they spew the talking points, but when it comes down to it, they're fundamentally unserious because they're not focusing on the actual problems.
And I think one of the biggest problems, one of the most existential problems that this causes, to use one of their terms, is that this all puts us, it positions China really nicely on the global stage. And that is probably something that doesn't get enough attention. So I've got a couple of articles here. Again, everything's in the show notes. One of them talks about how China not only possesses 35% of the world's entire rare earth mineral supply. Again, you need a lot of rare earth minerals to build wind turbines and solar panels and all of that. So a third of the world's entire rare earth mineral supply is in China, but it also accounts for 70% of global production. Additionally, China directly supplies 80% of the US's rare earth imports. So this is actually something that I recently learned, that they do have a third, right? So that means there's 2/3 spread out across the rest of the world for rare earth materials. However, they have like a near monopoly on the processing of those rare earth materials. So like even in the United States, one of the places that we do extract rare earth stuff from the ground in California, I believe, we have to send it to China for them to process. Are you aware of this, Jim? Because I wasn't. I was blown away when I heard about this.
I ask this question about a lot of topics, and the question I often ask is, if you were trying to, and in this case I'll fill in the blank, ruin America's economy and our position as a global power, what would you do differently than what the climate alarmists and Joe Biden administration is doing right now? You are handing, when Joe Biden came into office, he inherited a country that was energy independent, that for the first time in decades, something that was considered impossible. We were no longer reliant on foreign countries to put in the fuel to the fuel in the engine of our economy. We could do it all here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Joe Biden inherited. In what is it now? In 10 months, he has in less than 10 months, he has turned this into a disaster. And he has positioned China to he's given them the tools they're going to need by with this Green New Deal, with this green energy agenda, with what he talked about, the United Nations, like COVID and climate change. Again, he's putting them together. We can come together as a globe and do these things. It all goes back to China. China was the source of COVID-19, and China will be the source of everybody's energy. People talk about, they virtue signal, hey, I have solar panels on my roof, so I can put energy back to the grid. Congratulations. That probably came from China. It was made there and shipped over here to the United States on a ship powered by diesel. And then, again, you talked about the wind turbines, they have a shelf life of about, or a life of about 15, 20 years at most. And then those things have to be disposed of. And how do you dispose of them? You bury them in the ground, or you find somebody that will actually take them. You can't recycle these things. And so, this is all virtue signaling, but it's worse than that. It is purposeful policy to hand over global dominance to China.
Yeah.
When the United States, again, when Biden came into office, was positioned as the global superpower in energy, in our economic power, and it's all just being frittered away for. You have to think again. What would he do differently if he wanted to give the world away to China? And he would not have done anything differently. He would have done exactly what he's doing right now, and it's a disaster.
One of our listeners brings up an important point. He talks about the road. It's called Belt and Road Initiative. You flip-flopped a little bit, but I'll forgive you. But yeah, this is their plan to basically extend infrastructure into their surrounding countries in Asia and into Africa for the sole purpose of getting more rare earth material into China. So while that article suggests that only a third of rare earth material is in China, they're probably they're building infrastructure to increase that dominance above 1/3. So yeah, that's actually a very important point. But you're right. We're off of energy independence, and we're going to if we continue to go blindly down this road that we're being pointed towards by all these late night shows, we're going to become increasingly dependent on China. There's one last thing I want to get to, Chris.
Donnie,
Make it quick.
Very quick. I think Jim hit the nail on the head there, and it's even worse because the United States has gone way beyond our carbon emission cuts, and China and India have not. So why are these late night comedians not commending the United States for what they've done in terms of cutting global greenhouse gas emissions and pointing the finger at the other two countries who are basically giving the middle finger to the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, because they'll pay lip service every once in a while and say they're doing something and not actually do it.
And that occurred under the Trump administration.
So one last thing that I want to get to, and this kind of comes to that like elite, the elite group versus us type of thing. There is a very revealing interview that we came across that is hosted on the World Economic Forum website, which they are the biggest champions of the Great Reset. And so this is an interview between Klaus Schwab, who's founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, and Christine Lagarde, who is president of the European Central Bank, which is like Europe's equivalent of the Federal Reserve. So in one point, and there's actually a lot of interesting stuff in here, again, show notes. But at one point, Schwab asked Lagarde about the role central banks can play in the fight against climate change and how we can balance climate action and people's standard of living. Because there's this concern that if we do something, it's going to make life harder on all of us, which is true. So there's actually, if we had more time, I'd get into her talking about how the central bank can play a huge role in fighting climate change by doing this, that, and the other, which just goes straight into the Great Reset. This is just pure Great Reset fodder right here. But she gets into that second part of it about the idea of fighting climate change and whether or not that's going to have a negative impact on people's standard of living, which I've brought up before. Joe Biden and politicians like that in the United States will suggest that we'll become wealthier if we fight climate change. We'll have more jobs and all of that. They're a little bit more real in this interview. So she says, sometimes hard decisions have to be made, such as pricing carbon emissions, such as regulating activity, in ways that will make certain things more expensive. And that takes me to your second question. Can we arrive at the trade-off between fighting climate change, preserving biodiversity, and yet securing enough growth to respond to legitimate demands by the population? Don't you just love when you're referred to as the population? It just makes you feel so warm and cozy inside. And my first answer, Klaus, to be firm, is that to have a way of life, we need life. And in the medium term, we do have major threats on the horizon that could cause death of hundreds of thousands of people. So we need to think life first. We need to think way of life second. So she is just straight up admitting that the things that we do to help fight climate change will have a negative impact on your standard of living. And that, that's secondary. That's absolutely secondary.
You also just blazed over something in that quote which you were reading, and it's like, as she said, can we arrive at the trade-off between fighting climate change, preserving biodiversity, and yet securing enough growth to respond to legitimate demands of the population? So she will determine whose demands of standard of living is legitimate and whose aren't.
Right.
I imagine John Kerry's legitimate demand, or his demand to fly privately everywhere he goes, is legit. Your desire to fly more than twice a year to see family or to do whatever you damn well want to is not going to be legitimate. Again, the elites will never have their lives inconvenienced by this, let alone their economies and their lives destroyed. But you will.
Yeah,
that's why this needs to be resisted. You're always going to be the one punished. They will never be punished.
How can we come together to make sure that we secure the first priority, which is life, and also protect the way of life that people have, and make sure that the cost of it is not so high that some people that they can't tolerate it? I think that the trade-off that we can reach will probably require some redistribution, because it is clear that the most exposed people, the less privileged people, that are those that are going to need some help. So again, we'll just redistribute the wealth a little bit, for the people that can't tolerate it. And, do you think that that's working class people in the United States? Do you think she's talking about, blue collared people that are getting up at the crack of dawn so that they can eke out a living or anything like that? They're going to need some help. No. Her next paragraph is revealing who she's talking about.
Like pipeline workers?
Nope, definitely not who she's talking about. Under the Paris Agreement back in 2015, it was decided that all nations would put together a pot of $100 billion in order to help least developed countries adapt to climate change. So there it is. She's not talking about you. She's talking about other countries. And of course, it sounds so great. Yeah, we're going to help less developed countries. But we know how this works. All of this money, $100 billion that we start pouring into these least developed countries, they're not going to go to the people that need it. They're going to sit in the people who are wealthy, that are in control in those countries, and the politically connected people in those countries. Isn't politics fun, everybody? But Jim, we're already long, so I'll give you a final word on any of this.
Well, I'll just repeat what I said before. I really hope you come to our climate conference, if not in person, but watch it online, and it'll all be archived instantly on YouTube until they ban us, I suppose, so that you can learn the truth about what's going on. We are going to have discussions about renewable energy and its challenges, to put it mildly, but mainly its problems and how it's just not sustainable. They use the eco left uses the word sustainable in a way that actually doesn't make any sense. They don't care about you sustaining your standard of living. They don't care about actually that green energy doing what the Green New Deal wants to do is not sustainable. You cannot sustain a modern economy on what the Biden administration and AOC and the rest of the left in the United States wants to do. Your way of life is not sustainable. But again, their way of life will always be sustainable. They are the elites. They will instruct you and by force of law or force of force, reduce your standard of living and your quality of life in order to quote unquote save the planet. But their lives will not change one bit. And in fact, if they do change at all, it'll be improved. And this is not about saving the planet. This is about preserving their power and making sure you, the regular people, the people who make this world actually work, know your place, and your place is below them.
Yeah, if you thought the authoritarianism that's happened because of the pandemic and all of that, and we talked about Australia last week and just how authoritarian they can get because of the pandemic. If you thought that was bad, just wait for climate change stuff like that has the potential to dwarf anything you've seen in the last couple of years. But on that shiny note, we're going to say goodbye to everybody today. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the In the Think podcast. Join us if you're an audio listener, Friday. But if you are cool and join us live on YouTube and Facebook, you can join us on Thursdays. And you can put in your comments. Maybe we'll respond to you and all of that, as what the cool kids do nowadays. But if you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes, hit subscribe on the YouTube page. Just liking or sharing the video helps us break through the algorithm and reach more and more people. So that's something free that you can do that would really help us out. If you would like, you can send us your comments, questions, concerns to the show by emailing us at inthethinkpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
You can always find me at J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. Chris Talgo, you are a ghost on social media, so just join me in saying goodbye to the fine people.
Goodbye, everybody. See you next week.
That is right. We will talk to you next week.